So today we are talking to Laurie Butson of Clear to Flourish LLC. Hi, Laurie, how are you?
Hey, I'm great, Lindsay. How are you?
Great. I'm super excited to talk to you today, and I just wanted to let everybody know basically that you have been an amazing resource to me and my business. Um, Being a new business owner is super hard. And I'm just so grateful that I've had people like you in my life to help me out and give me resources and um, just, be a supporting person in this journey. So thank you so much. Thank you for being
My,
here for our very first interview.
my pleasure on all of that. It's always such a pleasure to be able to support other female entrepreneurs. It's a crazy, incredible journey to go out on your own and start a new business, and crazy in every sense of the word, right? Exciting, exhilarating, scary, like everything. So it's always such a pleasure to be able to support other entrepreneurs and especially female entrepreneurs. So, and I'm really happy to be your first guest. So thank you for inviting me.
Well, Lori is obviously she's a fellow entrepreneur, but her journey didn't start there. Um, So she specializes in positive psychology, which I'll be honest with you, I had no idea what that meant when we first met earlier this spring. So, Lori, can you tell us a little bit more about positive psychology and what you do?
Yeah, I would be happy to. So why don't we start with what positive psychology is on a very foundational level. And then I think it might help to talk just a little bit about what brought me to the world of positive psychology, because I also think that helps illuminate it a little bit. But
Absolutely.
first, and simply put, positive psychology it's a science, and it is the science of human flourishing and well-being. And so what that means is it is the scientific study of what makes us as individuals and humans, and then expanded to, organizations, communities, what makes us flourish and thrive. And a really nice way to think about positive psychology is to put it with I like to call it, the yin and the yang of traditional psychology and positive psychology. So we are much more familiar in our society with traditional psychology. And at a very basic level, the world of traditional psychology tends to focus on what's wrong. What is wrong and how do we fix it? What is wrong with, a circumstance? What's wrong with an individual? What is wrong with, maybe a particular situation with an individual? And how do we fix that? How do we get that person back to being okay? How do we get them back to a baseline? And that is hugely necessary, hugely important, has been around for decades, because we live in such a world that there is a lot that doesn't go right, that is wrong. And we want to have many tools at our disposal to be able to fix that and to navigate that. Positive psychology, if we look at kind of the other end of the spectrum, if you will, or the other side of the spectrum, is looking at when we get people back to being okay, or they start at a place of being okay, what do they need to be able to be better than okay? What are the conditions that we need to be able to flourish and to thrive? So, simply put, if traditional psychology looks at what is wrong and how do we fix it, positive psychology looks at what is right and how do we capitalize on that. And it is a very deep study a deep science that has a lot of different components, including, research and evidence-based tools. But again, the whole premise is, what are the conditions that we need to be able to thrive and flourish in life? So let me stop there. Does that make sense as a start?
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Do you think that in order to start that journey, um, for the positive side of things, do you need to have either come from a place of being okay already, or do you need to have done the prep work previously to get to a place where you're okay before you can start that positive journey?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. So I think if we look along a spectrum, right, there's something called an illness wellness continuum.
Mm.
And if we think about that, if we think about like a continuum, we think about a neutral point being neither ill nor well, right? And we look to one side, we have more of the illness side of the continuum, and it's different stages of being unwell. And the goal is to get somebody back to that neutral point, get somebody back to being okay. And then on the other side of it is continuing on the wellness part of that continuum. And again, it's different stages of wellness. And what I like about looking at something like an illness wellness continuum is that word continuum. I think so often in our society, we think in terms of and talk in terms of absolutes. We are healthy or we are sick. We are ill or we are well. We are happy or we are sad. When in actuality, it's never an absolute. There are stages, there are degrees, there are levels. And so if we take that concept of an illness wellness continuum and put it in the context of your question, the wellness continuum would run along that entire spectrum, because when you are ill, you are always trying to get well, right? And so you might be at a place where you are okay, you are not physically ill, you are not mentally ill, and you're able to kind of start from that neutral point and move what we call in positive psychology north of neutral, to continue that wellness journey, to continue to focus on your overall well-being. But equally so, you might not be at that neutral point yet. You may still be struggling from an illness perspective, whether it's physically, whether it is mentally. And then you've got two factors at play. You are working on your physical illness or your mental illness. And then you're also able to look at it from a wellness perspective as well. What are the things that I can be doing holistically to be moving myself along that wellness continuum? So the short answer is it's a little bit of both. You can start, from an okay neutral place and go north of neutral, increasing your overall well-being. But then you also can be focused on your overall well-being when maybe your physical or mental health might be still struggling.
I like that. I like talking about it in the continuum. I think that's super helpful for people, particularly my audience, as you know, is in chronic pain or struggling with a chronic illness. And when we talk about chronic conditions in that way, we talk about people being on that sickness end of everything. And I think we miss that point of talking about the wellness side sometimes,
Yes.
where, um, you know, how people experience pain and how people experience illness has a huge, or psychology has a huge part to play in
Yeah.
how we experience these things. And I think it's important for this population to know that they're on a continuum, they're not in a dichotomy, they're not just ill, they're not just not good. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I do like uh, that
Yeah.
continuum concept, particularly for my population as well. Um, so do you mind talking a little bit about your personal experiences? I
Yeah.
know we have something in common. We both have chronic conditions, right? So would you mind talking about your experience with your chronic condition and how this has sort of helped you and how you feel like it would help others in the same situation?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And, it's interesting. So I mentioned earlier, maybe touching upon how I got into and even discovered the world of positive psychology. And I think I'd love to just spend a minute on that because it sort of brings the journey sort of full circle, if you will. And I discovered the world of positive psychology. It'll be almost 5 years ago. And it was right at the start of the pandemic when I was working within an organization still. And I recognized within my organization and then larger society as a whole that we were really going through an inflection point where we were all not okay together. We were going through a very significant event, and people that had maybe not thought about well-being or their mental health very significantly before were needing to, because again, we were not okay. And it was actually okay to say that you were not okay, right? I think that so often we shy away from letting others know when we're not doing okay. But at the start of the pandemic, everything was new. Sort of all bets were off. We were in this new territory, and I recognized an opportunity that we were talking about mental health and overall well-being in a new way. We were talking about it in a new way within my organization. And then I noticed in society as a whole. And I noticed at that point that that was something that I wanted to be part of. I wanted to be part of continuing that conversation. And so that desire and that passion is what led me to positive psychology. And over the last 5 years, I have spent countless hours doing a lot of different training and certifications. I'm a practitioner and coach and consultant and resilience trainer. And so it started out from, all right, how can I help my organization? How can I be part of this overall conversation on well-being? What is really fascinating is where my journey led me, both, from an educational perspective, but then also my personal health journey. And 2 years ago, I got really sick. And for several months, I had no idea what was going on. It started out as being in pain, not knowing what that pain was and where it was coming from. And then uh, shortly after that, about 6 months after the pain started, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is an autoimmune disease. And brand new to me. I barely knew what an autoimmune disease was. I absolutely did not know what rheumatoid arthritis was. And so it really propelled me into a new journey of managing my health in a way that I had never needed to before. I had never faced anything that was not something short term, like in terms of getting sick and then getting better. This was something very different that I was experiencing. And it was at that time I was still in the corporate world. I decided that I needed to take a medical leave to focus on my health and getting myself healthier. And during that medical leave, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to tackle my health journey as proactively, as positively, and as holistically as possible. And in my first appointment with my rheumatologist, when I was diagnosed, my rheumatologist, he said two really important things to me. He said, listen, your body did not get this sick overnight, and you need to recognize that it is not going to get well overnight either, which became a very important point on my journey. But then the other piece of it was that it became very clear that I needed to go the medication route as one part of my healing journey, which I was okay with. That was very clear based on, the diagnosis and all of my labs and everything. But I also committed to myself that I wasn't going to just rely on medicine. I knew that there were so many different components that play a part in not only making us ill, but also making us well. And so s- lots of different things kind of happened and came together. But one of the really important pieces of my own health journey was I recognized that I had this science of human flourishing and overall well-being at my disposal. Never in a million years, when I started down my educational route of positive psychology, did I ever imagine that I would be applying it to myself in this way. And so I started to think about, all right, well, how can these things fit into my overall health journey and my overall healing journey? And so that is sort of the point in which my worlds collided in the education and the world and the science of positive psychology, and me having that at my disposal to I like to say, like, I had myself as my own case study to practice on and to really see what it looked and felt like to put it into practice.
I like that case study because I think of myself that way all the time as well.
Right.
And I'd like to think that there's, maybe the fact that we went into the careers that we did was, it was kind of meant to be because we were going to eventually go through this journey where, we would need to help ourselves with the skills that we've learned um,
I
in
am,
our professions. So, um,
yep.
when I went into physical therapy, I was not um, thinking I was going to have to continually use my physical therapy skills or my clinical reasoning skills, especially um, to figure out what the heck was going on with my body.
Mhm.
Uh, so
Exactly.
I think that's amazing that that sort of happened that way. Um, we both sort of ended up in positions where we realized, wait a minute, I have these skills and tools, and now I'm going through the other side of it with, not being okay. And I think for me, and I don't know if this is the case for you, there was a little bit of a denial piece where it was like, well, no, I'm not supposed to be not okay because I'm the provider. Like I'm the caregiver. I'm the person that helps people doing this. I'm not the person that goes through it. Um,
Yeah,
did you
absolutely.
experience that?
I can resonate with that from a professional perspective as well. And I'll liken it back to when I was still within my organization before I left. I left my organization just about a year ago to start my own business. And before I left, it I had many moments like you just described where I was like, wait a second, I should be able to handle all of this, because during the pandemic, I was I was really the face and the voice of overall well-being and mental health and taking care of our organization. I led global learning and development and employee experience. So it was all about helping to take care of our employees and make it a great place to work. And so all of us, that was my role, right? And I was the spokesperson for that. And so all of a sudden I am thrust into a place where I'm like, oh wow, okay, I am the one that is usually taking care of the others, and now I am the one that really needs to turn that attention back onto me. And that's really what I did, starting with my medical leave, and still to this day. It's, what do I need? What does my body need today? What does my mind need today? What does my life need today to be able to get to a place of being better than okay, to get to a place of more flourishing? And I can honestly say, one of the things when I started out on my journey of that case study, right, of looking to apply the world of positive psychology and the tools and the evidence-based practices to my own life, I started out with a question of kind of putting it out to the world, but to myself, of, can you flourish with a chronic illness? And at first, my I didn't know what my answer was, because I was not okay. I was absolutely not okay. I was in pain every day. I was waking up not being able to move my body, literally,
Mhm.
for several weeks at a time. But I wanted to be able to answer that question. And I wanted to be able to answer that question positively and enthusiastically. But at first, I was like, I don't know. What I can say a year and a half later is, you absolutely can. And that is what I am so passionate about bringing to the world. Um, you know, and especially the world of people living with chronic conditions, because, and let's face it, there are so many of us, and that number is growing every day. It's staggering. And I think that so often there's so many different things that play into a chronic illness. And I like to say that I think that the science and the world of positive psychology can help play like a missing link to that overall health journey. And I said this before, there's a lot of things that make us unwell, and I also believe that there are a lot of things that come into play to make us well. It's not just one thing, right? And
Right.
I'll give you an example of like the medication. I said that I was okay going the medication route, but I'm a firm believer that if I had just gone the medication route and made no other changes to my lifestyle, to my activities, to my mindset, I do not think I would be here where I am today. Medicine is one piece of my puzzle, but there's also many other pieces of my puzzle as well.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's where, I got frustrated too, being in the healthcare system as a provider. We're very like put into a box in the healthcare system, in our healthcare system here in the US, particularly because everything is just like so separate. In some places the teamwork amongst clinicians is better than others, but for
Mhm.
the most part, with our insurance model, I would have a referral for someone that has, back pain, and I had to only address their back. Like I could not address them as a whole person. I was
Yeah,
seeing a back, I was seeing a shoulder, I was seeing a neck. It wasn't a person.
yeah,
So and the psychology piece is huge. It's so huge. And I found with my clients, even coming and they're knowing that they're coming for physical therapy, um, there was a lot of other therapy happening in
mm,
my sessions as well. And that continues now with my private practice. I have a lot more flexibility to allow that, because letting somebody vent for a half an hour in a session is not billable under physical therapy billing codes. So I love having the flexibility of being able to let people talk about things going on in their lives that, seemingly, according to insurance companies, might have nothing to do with their back pain, but really it does, right? Um, so Do you want to give a couple pieces of advice for people going through this chronic pain or chronic condition journey?
Would love to. And I think I'm gonna kind of use what you just said and segue into that. So you mentioned a couple of times the whole person, right? That
Mhm.
that you might be needing to treat somebody with you know, with a back problem or shoulder pain, and you focusing or needing to originally just focus on that, not necessarily the bigger picture. And I think that that to me is a great segue into, okay, what do we actually mean when we're talking about the world of positive psychology and the science of positive psychology and looking at us as whole beings? And so the very simply and quickly, the the world of positive psychology has a number of what I call pathways to flourishing. And so there are six different pathways. There's positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, achievement, and vitality. And so if you just think about those words, positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, achievement, and vitality, that starts to paint a bigger picture of us, right? We are complex beings and we're made up of many different components and many different components that we need to be able to thrive in life, right? And that ranges from being able to work with our negative emotions to building more positive emotion in our life when it might not be there. That might be making sure that we are um, finding and leveraging relationships in our life because those play a key part in our livelihood and a key part in our overall well-being. And I mean, if you look around, there's so many statistics. We live in a loneliness epidemic right now. We are a lonely society. And there's a statistic out there that it is the equivalent, the loneliness that we are experiencing in our society and that people are experiencing is the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes every single day, the consequences that that has to our body. So relationships, whatever form those are, play a big role in it. Having accomplishments, making achievement, looking at our vitality, our bodies, our movement, our nutrition. And so some tips are, and where I like to start with clients that I work with is meeting them where they're at and introducing them to the world of positive psychology and all of the different options, if you will, that are available. And it's looking at those six pathways, recognizing that each of them plays a critical component into our overall well-being. There's lots of different tools and resources and awareness and education under each of those six pathways. And they all play an important role, but meeting each individual with where they're at to see where do we start? And for some individuals, that might be with positive emotion, for example. I absolutely know from experience that when you are dealing with chronic pain or chronic illness, it is really hard to find the positive in that situation.
For sure.
Really hard. And so that said, I also believe that there are ways to manage and learn from and look at our emotions. So, positive psychology, the positive emotions are all about being able to understand the role that emotions play in our lives and our bodies. And it's not about ignoring the negative emotions and our negative feelings, but it's understanding them, recognizing them, identifying them, seeing what we can learn from them and how we can work with them. But then, equally so, especially when it's harder to come by, finding ways to build positive emotion in our life. And I'll give you one example. This is a very easy but really powerful tool and one that I do every day and did every day in my journey. And it is an activity and exercise called Three Good Things. And the simple premise of it is at some point in the day, I happen to do mine at the end of the day. The end of the day, you identify and write down, whether this is in a journal, whether there I use an app on my phone, three good things that happened in the day and why. What was the impact? And the significance there is that it is training your brain to look for the good and noticing the good. And so a great tool and one that I used every day in my journey, especially early on, is a simple exercise called Three Good Things. And the significance of it, and it simply put, is that every day you take time to identify three good things that have happened in the last 24 hours. And so I did mine at night. And the significance is you don't want to just think about it. You either want to jot it down, write it in a journal, or I use an app on my phone called Three Good Things. And there is a lot of research behind the benefits of doing that. But really, what it is trying to do is get you to notice and train your brain to notice the good things that are happening. We have what is called a negativity bias. Our brains are wired to more naturally see what is wrong and the negative. And there are lots of different ways to retrain our brain to try to focus on the positive. And so, what I will say is that there were days when this was the hardest thing to do because when you're waking up in the morning and you're not able to move your body, looking for good things is hard. But I can also guarantee you that they're always there. Sometimes they are the smallest things where I am feeling a little bit better than I was this morning. And I had a great conversation with my teenager. So it's recognizing that despite maybe the hardest day, that you want to still try to find those three good things. And just a little bit about the research, they found that just by doing this simple activity for 2 weeks, the lasting effects for up to 6 months are huge in terms of decrease in depression, decrease in anxiety, increase in happiness, decrease in stress. So it works. There's evidence behind it, and I saw it work. Um, I'll give you one other example. Is so let's take a look at one of the other pathways, and let's look at achievement, right? Achievement, one of the things that I tapped into almost daily for a long period of time, especially when I was going through the hardest part of my journey, which the hardest part of my journey was a month when I wasn't able to move in the morning and I had to slowly figure out how to move my body again each day. One of the things that I tapped into a lot was actually coaching. And coaching is different than therapy. Again, if we kind of think about that dichotomy or the yin and the yang of traditional psychology and positive psychology, coaching fits really well into positive psychology because it's looking at where are you at and where do you want to be and what support do you need to get there. And so I tapped into coaching. Being a coach, I have a wonderful resource of other coaches, and every day I would show up vulnerably and taking a look at where I was at that day and setting some small goals for myself made a huge difference, right? And some days those goals were trying to move my body, and it might be walking to the end of my driveway and back. And most days we don't even think about walking to get our mail, right? But that was a goal, an achievement that I was setting for myself. And there's a lot of power behind setting goals, whether they're big or small for ourselves, and working towards those and the benefits that that can play in our overall well-being. So those are just a couple of quick examples. Happy to give more or answer any questions or,
Yeah,
those are just a couple.
those are great strategies. Goal setting is something that I talk about with my clients as well. And I think one of the challenges for someone who was previously well and is now on closer to the illness side of the continuum is that the goals that they want to set are for themselves when they were well. Uh,
Yes.
and then they have a hard time adjusting their goals to their new condition or their new reality. And that does seem to be a struggle. So what advice do you give those people that struggle with making those new goals that are better fitting their current reality and maybe were part of their wellness reality?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things. The first is it's okay to grieve. It's okay to grieve that you might be in a different place than you were before or where you ever thought you would be. I know I went through that myself. Um, you know, a few years before I got diagnosed, I ran a half marathon. Before getting diagnosed, I was hiking, 4 or 5 miles a day. And so I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to go from what you were doing to something very different in terms of your capabilities. And so part of it is it's okay to grieve that difference. But what I would also say is to not stay in that grief, that you want to get yourself to a place. And again, I mentioned before the impact of negative emotions, understanding what they are, what are they trying to tell you? Grief is telling you that you're missing something, that you're sad, that you're mourning something. And mourning could be what you used to do, what your body used to be able to do. And so it's okay to do that, but not to stay in that. Where we run into trouble is when we get stuck in those negative emotions. So grieve, but then figure out, where are you at? What is your new? What is your new normal? It might not be your new normal forever, or it might be, but recognizing where are you at and making some realistic adjustments and goals and realigning the expectations to where you're at, because that's your reality. It is not running a half marathon like you might have before, or I might have before, right? And that's okay. Trying to find the joy, as hard as it might be to come by, to realigning and resetting the expectations and meeting yourself and your body where it's at, and then making the small gains from there.
I I like that. Sometimes I'll talk about a new day zero for people or a new day one for people
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of get out of comparing ourselves to what we used to be. Um, so maybe, you know, I kind of in the same boat. Like ran a 10K and then, now it's like, okay, if I can do one block,
Yeah.
an accomplishment. But,
Yeah.
we're our 10K or our half marathon wasn't our day zero. That was like day, 7,800 of a previous,
Yeah.
um, I don't even know what you want to call it, but
Yeah. Yeah.
previous condition, a previous reality. And our new reality has given us a new day zero and a new day one. And like you said, we need to maybe grieve that former reality for a little bit. but then sort of come into and accept where our new day one is.
Yeah.
And, if it was yesterday, then, I'm only going to compare myself to what was going on yesterday and just see what was better than yesterday or
Yeah.
what was better
Yep.
than this morning. Um,
Exactly. Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's super important, I think.
Yeah, and it makes me think about that quote that I shared earlier on that my first rheumatologist shared with me, right? That your body didn't get sick overnight and it's not going to get well overnight, right? I think that your day zero and day one is a really nice analogy to that, right? Like we didn't get to a certain point pre-chronic illness overnight, and we're not going to get to a certain point with a chronic illness overnight. It takes time, and recognizing that and trying to be okay with that, because the more okay you are with that, the more you're going to set yourself up for success. We're not going to get well overnight, and so how do you reset those expectations and then appropriately manage those expectations for moving forward with what you need today?
So I think both of your exercises sort of like work together there, where you're setting yourself some goals and achievements, and then at the end of your day, you're going and you're recognizing those as your great things for the day, or your good things for the day, and those two things kind of seem to work hand in hand. And
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's another avenue of positive psychology, right? There's so many different things that work hand in hand, and that, there are the six pathways, but there's so much interconnectedness of the many areas that you could focus on, to increase and improve your overall well-being. They're not they're not standalone living in silos. They are connected, right? Because even if we bring in the relationships, um, what are the relationships in your life that you want to tap into to support you? And if you don't have those in your life, how can you find those? How can you tap into, whether it's care providers, whether it is, a coach, whether it is somebody to help you with a new movement regimen, right? So there's so much interconnectivity of these areas, and and then that plays into achievement, that plays into vitality and taking care of our body, right? There's just a lot of interconnectedness, and again, that is what I think brings the beauty of, I like to say that I think positive psychology is a missing link to helping us manage chronic illness. And that missing link provides a link to so many other things and connection to so many other things that can support us from an overall well-being.
I think we're gonna have to like name the episode "The Missing Link."
Okay, there we go. I love
I
it.
love I love it. Um, or something along those lines. Um,
Mhm.
that's absolutely true because we even from my standpoint is physical therapy, and we think of it again very physically, but I think our whole healthcare system has sort of moved in that direction where we're taking a biological and physiological standpoint for a lot of conditions and illnesses, which is good, but it's only one piece. And like you said, how medication is only one piece because that's addressing the biochemical component. It's not addressing the psychosocial component necessarily. It might have a role that affects that component, but
Yep.
not directly addressing it.
Yep.
Um, and your positive psychology is that piece that's addressing that psychosocial and interpersonal component that uh, the healthcare system that we traditionally deal with doesn't tend to address.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and I think again to sum that up, it's like, there's not one thing that makes us ill, and there's not one thing that makes us well. And it's, looking at each individual as an individual based on their circumstances, based on their needs. And I'm such a analogy, visual type of person. I really like it as a puzzle. What are the different puzzle pieces that you can fit together to take you on your journey to well-being? And that's from a physical health perspective, but then also from a mental health perspective. And when I say mental health, I say, oh, I'm meaning overall well-being, right? And that's another, just one other key thing to mention here. I think so often, especially when we are faced with chronic conditions, we are so focused on the physical nature of that, because there's 10, whether, unless it, so let me correct that. I'm thinking about it from my chronic condition, because it's very physically a condition, but there's many chronic conditions. Some of them might be mental chronic conditions, some of them are physical chronic conditions. And either way, I think that tend to be so focused on what the condition is. And absolutely, we need to be focused on healing that and focusing on improving that, but not forgetting that there is that wellness continuum along the top of that that can play into and does play into significantly helping us get better and get less ill and more well. And those are additional tools and resources and awareness and support from a well-being perspective beyond just your chronic condition.
So important. And I think everything that you've said here today is so important and so impactful. And I just really appreciate you coming on and talking to my audience about this. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of benefit from this chat, this interview that we've had today. Thank you so much, Laurie. Where can people find you? So if our audience wants to follow you on social media or get in touch with you for coaching or consulting, how would they do that?
Yeah, so my website is www.clearedtoflourish.com. I'm also very active on both LinkedIn and Facebook. So you can find me on LinkedIn with Laurie Butson. And then on Facebook, my business page on Facebook is Cleared to Flourish. So you can follow me there. And then, Lindsay, one thing that I would love to offer to your audience is I have what is called a Flourishing with Chronic Illness starter kit, which provides a great overview and summary and workbook basically of what we just talked about here today. And so I like to describe it as giving people a starter kit, like a foundation of taking the world of positive psychology and really starting to build a foundation for what that could look like in terms of it being a support as you manage your chronic conditions. So I would love to offer that to your community free of charge. And we can talk about how to, give them the link to access that and so forth.
Awesome. That sounds amazing, Lori. I'm going to put links to all of Lori's information in the description. But
Perfect.
also, if anyone is on my email list, we'll go ahead and send that out to the email list as well. So if you're not on that, you want to go ahead and get on that. We're going to put the link to that in the description as well. Thank you so, so much, Lori. I really appreciate you coming on. And I think this was so helpful for me, but also I think it's going to be super helpful for the folks listening today too. So
Well, thank you again. It was such a pleasure to be your first guest, and I really enjoyed the conversation. So I hope that it is useful to some of your listeners.
thanks, Laurie.